Hello, everybody, and welcome to Design Office Hours. Super excited to be starting this off for everybody. I'm just going to send a few social posts right now. We'll get everybody in here. One day we'll have this timed out and coordinated, but today we're just going to do it live because it's the first one. We're figuring stuff out. So welcome. So we're going to do what it says on the tin here. The Design Office Hours. Ideally, it's a time for y'all to bring questions, to bring work in progress, and I'll give some feedback. And if you don't know me, I think most people coming here, excuse me, would know me. But if you don't, I'm Nick Basile. I am a developer, product manager, product designer, general product person. Been doing this now for over 10 years. Run my own agency, Markham Square, or I do a ton of client work working with awesome startups and other companies along the way as well. Excuse me. I think like everybody else, battling a little cold today. So I'm sorry in advance for all the coughs, but I've got some water here, so hopefully we'll get into it. Let's start. Any questions? I know we've got a few people. I'm seeing some participants. Welcome. I'm going to switch my chat over to live chat. What questions, what design questions do y'all have? We can start there. And if you guys don't have any questions while you're thinking, we can pivot. We can pivot to me just pontificating about design and talking about design topics. And I've got a few queued up here for us, but would love to start with community questions and questions that people have. And I used to teach, so I can sit here for a long time waiting for questions, but that's not the point of YouTube. So why don't we go ahead and just start jamming out stuff. So one thing that I get asked about a lot from people is like, what is the process? And I get this a lot, not from necessarily other designers, but like other product people who are either more technical, like developers. This way. They're like, this design stuff, we get it. Design's great. We like it. We know it. We want to work with it. But like, can you tell us a little bit more about like the whole point of it? And I get that. If you're not in the nitty gritty or the weeds with it, it can be a little overwhelming or a little bit like, what's the point? So here's how I like to think about it. And we can kind of start with the high picture thing and maybe that'll generate some questions. And if you have any, please feel free to drop them. I'm watching the chat here too. So the way I like to think about like building products is you have this idea of product. And that could be like product management. And we'll just do like some nice little overlaps here. And you're going to have design. And then we have engineering. And this is very, I should preface this by saying this is digital products. There are physical products you can build as well. And that's a whole nother can of worms. But, basically we have our overlaps. And if I was doing this in regular Figma, I would add some opacities and this would be, there we go, a little easier to see. I'm doing FigJam here because I thought it would be a little easier for us to do some nice overlaps like this. And we bring this to the front. See, the designer in me wants to make this look pretty. Okay, so we've kind of got these overlaps here. And this is, I think, as a conceptual model where everyone thinks. We're thinking about product development, making digital products. We've got product, we've got design, and we've got engineering. And we know you work with startups, you work with like non-technical people, and they think only about engineering. It's like we've got the idea and we got to get this out into the world. And so you hire engineers, you work with engineers to just get stuff out into the world. But in reality, the really good teams, they're also considering product and they're considering design as well. And when it comes to like, well, okay, so we've got these three things. What are they doing? What are they caring about? Why don't we spell that out a little bit more? So we got product, and there's like two kind of like key considerations that like product is worried about. And typically product management, you got a product manager. In a small team, this is the entrepreneur, right? This is the person running the business, but what are they thinking about? Like, what's the problem? And who has the problem, right? And typically, and this is, we're generalizing a little bit, but when we think of product, that's what we're focused on here. We're trying to say for this person, for this problem space, like, what's the problem? So like Airbnb, what's the problem? The problem is that people you could rent a hotel and that would solve your problem of I need a place to stay or a place to live in this location. But hotels were really expensive. They were, you felt like you were getting this like really corporate sanitized experience. you want it to live like a local and be more authentic. I know a lot of people have like certain dietary constraints. They need to cook for themselves. The problem was hotels don't have kitchens. And so I have no way of providing food for myself in a safe manner. And Airbnb kind of steps in and says, we can solve all those problems, right? And so that's like at their perspective, like how they're thinking about things. Obviously, it's grown and evolved since then. But at its core, right? Anything that they're doing is there. And then we have design. So what is design doing? And obviously, there's overlap. It's not like we're not considering any of these things with design, but it's much more about like what's the solution and who are we solving problems for, right? So what's the solution? Who are we solving the problem for? Obviously, this is, again, simplistic and a mental model that we can start building from. But design is really focused on, okay, given that we have this problem space and given that we know who we're solving the problem for, obviously there's a lot of overlap in reality between that. Like designers do a lot of product research and discovery, and the product team does a lot of solutioning in conjunction with the design team. But the primary focus is, given that we have these problems, what can we start solutioning, and who are we solving this problem for? So for instance, we keep using Airbnb as an example. They, if I remember correctly, I think they started with like an offshoot of couch surfing, which, if you don't remember, that was like you could literally rent somebody's couch and stay there, and it was and it wasn't even renting; it was like just people were making their couches available, and they did it for like a conference, and that was their MVP. And so for their initial very MVP launch, they weren't focused on like everyone traveling everywhere. They were focused on this very specific audience, and that's most products. You're solving a problem for a very specific person, for a specific community audience, and that solution just has to work really well for them. And then there's engineering or development. And so we come over there and we say like, okay, how do we build the solution? And that's typically what they're focused on. They're focused on other things as well. Again, this is simplistic, like things like reliability and scalability and performance and all these things that engineers care about. But at the end of the day, they're responsible for building the thing. And obviously, in order to build something, you have to understand the problem. So they're doing some overlap with product and getting caught up in the context. And they also need to they can't just build anything willy-nilly. They need to have some input into design as well. And they need to be able to say, okay, like we're helping shape the solution because we need to worry about feasibility and can we actually build this thing that we're committing to as well. So they give us like these nice reality checks. But ultimately, like this is where we're starting from. So this is the trifecta, right, of everything in a product. Now, the interesting thing is this is all happening in the context of a business. It can be a nonprofit, can be a government agency. But typically, for the majority of our professional use cases, this is happening in the context of a business. So there's sort of this meta game of, is this a problem people will pay for? Is the solution we're providing valuable enough that we get payment for it? And does the solution we've built, is it monetizable, or is there some sort of a way to make money? Because at the end of the day, this all costs money. Product work is a function of time, and if you want a lot of people doing it, you need to pay them. And so whether you're a startup and it's sweat equity and that kind of stuff, you're still, at the end of the day, regardless of how little your dollar amount is, you're investing time and you're getting compensated for that time at some level. You would hope. Because the goal is to make money, right? You're doing all this effort because you want to do a value exchange with whoever is purchasing your product. And so there's that meta container. We could draw a big circle around it of like the business, right? And big B business. The business. But that's like the context in which this is happening. And you can keep zooming out. That's always a really fun exercise. The business exists in a community, which exists in a society, which exists you can go to the nation level. And you can keep zooming out. And that's like getting into like wicked problems and stuff like that. But we're going to focus a little bit more zoomed in right here. Otherwise we get crazy. But yeah, so this is like, so when I start conceptualizing and getting back to that original question that designers and maybe product people are asking, like, what is design? What are we doing here? where we're solutioning, right? We're coming up with good solutions to the problems that we've identified, but we're helping our partners in product and engineering. We're helping them identify the problem, identify the right people with the problem, and then we're helping them build the problem as well, because there's a huge feedback loop that happens between design and engineering as well here. So that's kind of our initial step here. I'm going to take a breather and maybe like a slight sip of water here, but do we have any questions right now about this in particular, like how design works, how product works, or other questions? Remember, this is open office hours. I'm just jamming right now, but if y'all have design questions or would like feedback on anything, if you've got a link to a website or a product experience that I can log into and start playing around with, I would love to give live feedback on some work as well. All righty. But yeah, we can keep jamming. I'll let you all think here. I know it's always hard to be on the spot and you're like, I didn't come with any questions. I don't know what I'm going to talk to Nick about. And that's okay. We're here to help as much as we can. So let's think a little bit more here. We talked about the business. This is like interesting context, I think, thinking about the business, because it gets lost a lot of times, especially if you're a little bit more junior, or like as you get more senior, I think the focus on the business becomes much more prevalent. But when you're really starting out and you're doing like a lot of like practitioner work, or you're shipping code, or you're writing like PRDs and tasks and user stories, or you're in Figma day in, day out, like actually designing the experience, it's so easy to lose that business context. And I think the product community in general has done a better job at the user context. It's funny, in agency life, when we work with customers who are like non-technical, they're like subject matter experts, they have a very good focus on the business. And we have to like put on our product hats and say, well, what about the customer? Who are we building this for? But with product people, we sometimes get the inverse, where we're very focused on the customer to the detriment almost of the business itself. But really, that's in a capitalist system that we're operating within, that's what needs to happen, right? It's we need the business to be truly like profitable, at least like cash flow neutral, right? You're bringing in as much money as you're letting out, so we can keep doing it. And really, what does that buy us? That buys us time to continue to explore the problem space and to continue iterating and developing better and better solutions, with the idea that the better the solution, the more valuable it is, the more you can sell it for, and so on and so forth. Another interesting angle here, and so this is very, very product focused. Lots of other things happening in the business. There's operations, right? Some businesses will have a whole operations wing that relies on the product, but is adjacent to it. So that's important as well. And then there's also legal gets in there all the time, and there's more and more that we can dig into. But let me see. Let me look at chat here. Any questions coming through in the chat here? Ooh, yes, thanks, Matt. Can see you there. This is exciting times. We're getting into it here. And remember, this is time for you guys. So if y'all have questions or have anything you want to ask, feel free. We can certainly dive into it. See some more. We got some folks coming and going. That's all good. And actually, one thing that I'd love to ask is if this is a good time. And I know we're kind of middle of the day, sort of around lunchtime for people. It's hard with time zones, I think, everywhere. So if there's a better time, we can get into it as well. But okay, so we've kind of focused on some high level conceptual stuff. How does this translate, right? Let's sort of zooming into the picture here. And so where I see a lot of people getting hung up are the intersections between like people to, maybe 10 years ago, I think UX design and UI design, now product design, was sort of it's still emergent. It still is in a lot of ways. But we almost had like an existential crisis of like, what are we doing as an industry? And I think we've gotten much clearer about it and much more defined. And new people coming into this industry have a much better sense of like, what's my role? What's my purpose? What am I doing? Same thing, engineering, product management also another sort of emergent phenomenon over the last 10 or so years, but I think kind of finding its own legs and being able to operate these days. What are we doing? What's our role? And so the pillars have gotten much better, but where a lot of teams break down is the overlap. And especially like the trifecta, the big thing in the middle where teams have to come together. And a lot of that stems from like human problems, right? So what you'll have is typically you'll hire engineers first. And you know, we've seen this with a lot of our clients and small teams that grow. And they are now, when you only have one pillar, they're responsible for all the other work. So you have engineers doing the shaping, you have engineers doing the designing, and maybe that works if you get a superstar 10x engineer who can do all this stuff for you. But at some point, they're gonna want to just be an engineer. And same with a designer. They're just going to want to be a designer, or they're just going to want to be a product person. And so they're going to say, hey, we need to get some roles in here to fill this in. And so you might have somebody come in and stand up like the product discipline or the design discipline. We've seen it go both ways. But you know, now we have like somebody else kind of sharing the work and focusing on these things. And they bring very good relevant skills to these things. So the designers obviously are bringing a lot of visual design skills. They're bringing a lot of like systems diagramming and process optimization, hopefully skills as well. And the way I like to think about designers is they're visual communicators, right? That's their core skill set. They're really good at ingesting a lot of information, a lot of uncertainty, and things you know, that would scare most people, and then they translate that into something we can all see and we can work from to build a shared understanding. Because ultimately, that's what design is driving towards, especially in the product context. Is are we all aligned, and can we all visualize what the solution should be for the problems that we're trying to solve, for the people we're trying to solve them for? And so that is just such a skill, and it's something that you know, when you work with a really good designer and they're bringing those ideas to life, and you're just like, oh my goodness, how did I can see it now? I can understand where we're going. That it's incredible. So designers, super valuable, worth their weight in gold. And then good engineers too. Like, okay, we've got this drawing, this picture, this representation of the world we want to get to, and then they bring it to life. Oh my goodness, it's unbelievable when you get a team chugging along and working like that. And then product is, I feel like they do a lot of invisible work behind the scenes, and it doesn't get recognized as often, because design and engineering are very tangible. You see the mock-ups, you see the code output. Product is sort of not behind the scenes, but they're working on the process. They're working on, okay, how do we facilitate all these connections together? How do we like clearly define this problem? How are we, scoping and shaping the work that needs to happen? And sometimes that's not directly like tangible to output. And so sometimes that work gets lost. Now, typically that's compensated for by their proximity to stakeholders, because they're typically the ones talking to management, talking to leadership, talking to the rest of the team. So they get a lot of face time, which is nice because that sort of balances, I think, sort of the necessary but invisible nature of the work sometimes, but it's interesting. So coming back to so now we have intersections, right? So at the beginning, we just had our engineer, and they were doing everything. They were doing this shaping work of product. They were doing the ideation design work of the design team, and they were like producing the work. Now, all of a sudden, you have somebody in one of these other roles, and typically they'll step in, and at the beginning, it's hunky-dory. You have the honeymoon period, and everything is going great because that person is, just by nature of arriving, taking so much weight off of the other people, and establishing the discipline within the organization. But at some point, and this is usually, it could be like a year into the project, or it could be very quick. It could be a couple of weeks. The friction starts to develop, right? Where there's breakdowns in communication between these worlds, and there's also just lack of shared understanding, because everyone gets focused and they have their own problems that they're trying to solve, right? And it becomes unclear, like, well, how do we work engineering into our design process so they can give better feedback, or how do we do design reviews in engineering so the designers can help course correct on things that weren't implemented as intended. And those rituals are good and pragmatic, but you see the breakdown at the intersection, right? And a lot of product teams will like thrash there. And you'll it's frustrating for founders and it's frustrating for leadership because you'll see a product team that was crushing it like 6 months ago, all of a sudden start thrashing and not being productive and not being able to ship at the velocity that we were accustomed to. And everyone starts asking why and pointing fingers and figuring it out. And oftentimes it's this breakdown of communication here between the silos. The other thing that can happen is you have to zoom out to that business layer again. And that business layer, the business needs to be setting like an overarching vision for everybody to be moving towards, right? And an overall direction. Because otherwise, in a vacuum, we're just going to start inventing and making up stuff. And so when the business gets either too big or it starts communicating where we want to go as a company, as an organization, the product team will start inventing things, which, don't blame them. They got work to do. They got things they got to figure out. And then all of a sudden they start going down paths that are tangential to where the business needs to go, and it feels like they're not working productively anymore. And so you can have that happen as well. So you sort of the two things that we try to suss out with teams that are coming to us and they're saying like, we're thrashing, we're not getting any work done, things are falling apart. It's like, okay, do we have a vision problem and a roadmap problem where we don't have a good overarching direction, or do we have a communication problem? It's something. Are there silos that have formed and the relationships between these disciplines not working anymore? Or and we try to dig in as much as we can. And that involves a lot of interviews and sitting down with people and getting lunch and just trying to hear and learn and observe how they're operating as a team so that we can start diagnosing what are the key issues. And it's almost always different per team. There's a couple of commonalities and shared things, but especially between design and engineering, it's a lot of, well, the engineers didn't develop it the way we designed it. It was different than the mockups. And engineering being like, well, we didn't have mockups until the last minute. We didn't get to weigh in on the feasibility of the designs, and them being under a huge time crunch, and so they're just shipping stuff that they know works. And so that's typically the biggest red flag that we see, and the thing that most teams are struggling with. But it's can't be anything, and so it does help to listen and observe and kind of try and diagnose things. But I've been talking for for a second now. What questions do we have? We have any other design questions? And this is open-ended, right? It can be anything. We could get into big picture stuff. We've kind of been big picture today, kind of focusing on what is design? How does it fit into product? How do we start conceptualizing and thinking about it? It can be very tactical. We can do Figma questions. We can do design system questions. We can do user research. How do we do user research? How do we do design, like on a fundamental level? So that's all. We can talk about analytics. That's a fun area as well. I don't know who's still here. Can I see participants? Let's see. Oh no, I don't think oh, maybe I can. Maybe I can. Oh well. So we'll just keep jamming then. This will be a fun time for everybody. Why don't we look at a design here? I'll try and find something in Figma, and we can just kind of look at it and improve it a little bit more. And this is something that is sort of a fun project that I use for teaching concepts with, and I've done a few other live streams about it. I think in the last live stream we talked about how do we prepare this for handoff, so that way other people can go and use it and work with it. And we talk about it today. But I was looking at these and I was realizing we're probably missing some parts of the experience. And what was also realizing is it's very, very basic, right? And that's intentional because it's like a design prop, and it was something I did. It is truly more of a prop than a real product experience. But I was looking at this and I'm saying to myself, it's still pretty basic. It's still pretty simplistic, even from like a product perspective. And I was, and so now all of a sudden I've got a problem in front of me as a designer. And my problem is, how do I make this more interesting, like visually engaging for people? And that's a big part of the role, especially UI design, visual design. We get into, can we make this just more interesting on the whole? And so we start ideating. we start coming up with different ideas around how we can do that. And so part of that is understanding who we're designing for, who our audience is. And then the other part of that is just trying things. It's I think people get wrapped up in this idea that designers are pulling perfectly formed ideas out of their heads every single time and being like, here you go, this is amazing stuff. And when you work with senior designers, it looks like that because they've just done so much and they've experimented and they've just played with things so much. But in reality, it takes a lot of iteration. And I think that's the most fun thing we do as designers. So what I was going to try and do is just grab this landing page. And the way I like to work typically is off a finals page. I think we looked at this before. We had a little inspo page of other sites that we were kind of referencing here. And then we have some work in progress here. And this is, I think, a graphic I made for some sort of video launch or something. But we'll bring this in here. And the nice thing about like a work in progress section is like you're free to explore. And that's what I really encourage people to do. And you'll see like here in this document, you can kind of see like page structure and different parts of the application. If you saw like my real work in progress, it will look very messy, and it's about to look very messy. So kind of our goal here is how do we, make this a little bit more visually interesting. So I'll leave the base here and I'll just duplicate this. One thing I was thinking about is this is a site about yard help. And we kind of were playing with the nature theme here with the green and stuff. But we kind of got the lawnmower as our logo. Can we add some visual interest? Maybe we could do like a grass effect or something like that. And if you're not like a super good illustrator or anything like that, you can go find icon packets and stuff like that anywhere you want. I was thinking though, what if we just like along the bottom here of the frame, like just started drawing some grass. And that would make things a little bit more visually interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove auto layout because that's going to mess with this. Oh boy. They'd say learn your keyboard shortcuts, especially if you're going to be live streaming them. So the next thing I'm going to do, start making grass. And like design, this is a fun one. Like how do you make grass? Here's a fun one. So we've got the circle here and we've got this rectangle here. And one thing we learn very early in our design careers and in our design education is like shapes have meaning. So which of these is friendlier? Is it the circle or the rectangle? And most people would say the circle. Which of these is like angry or aggressive? And most people would say the square because we have corners. And so shapes communicate stuff to us. And if we were to take the shape and if I go like this and I make it a little smaller and I go like this and I make it a little smaller, most people would say, what do you have here? A snowman. And so shapes have meaning. It's sort of one of the core ideas of visual design. And you can use simple shapes to make complex shapes. And that is like the foundation of a lot of graphic design and a lot of like actually making things that look like other things. Now they're illustrators, right? And they do work with pens and pencils and shapes as well, but like they're doing stuff that's even beyond my skill set, and I'm always so impressed with illustrators. But this is the foundation of a lot of my work when I'm designing and actually translating things. So what am I going to do? I'm going to start with a simple shape. I'm going to start with something that roughly looks like a blade of grass, and then we're going to come in here. I'm going to get to the layer level. I always forget. I think it's Alt click or something like that, or maybe I just want to make this sharper. And I think I can do it if I mirror the angle and the length. Awesome. Nope, we wanted to just do mirror the angle. That's all good. That one's still stuck. Maybe no mirroring. That's probably one. There we go. So we bring that, I don't know, down there. And this is very Bob Ross. I'm putting on my Bob Ross hat. Like, how's it feel? I'm also not trying to be like making the world's most realistic blade of grass. I want to get the idea across. But this is a blade of grass. And maybe we bring this in a little bit. And I can sharpen that like so. That's looking a little more like grass. And if I take this, alrighty, down here, make it a little smaller. Nice. Now we're cooking. So what I'm also going to do is we're going to take this frame here. We're going to clip the content. There we go. That was sort of the effect I was looking for. we've got one blade of grass. And we'll just take this green color here. But now we've kind of got the vibes, right? And what we can do here is we'll take this guy and we'll flip him horizontal. Ah, nice. Now we got some more grass. And we'll take this guy and we'll put him on an angle and we'll move him around. And we can layer this up to start looking more like real grass. I've only made one shape here, right? Like the more you invest in like finessing this and actually doing stuff, like, yeah, the more it's going to look like real grass and it's going to, be a more probably effective illustration. But you start here, you start working with it. You can change the shape here. We're just going quickly, but you can start building up your little chunk of grass. Okay, so now you can union this, you can group it. I'm just going to group it for right now. Command G. Nice. So now we bring this here. It's starting to look like grass, and we can flip it horizontal here to just make it a little different. That's like too reversed. That's too much. And again, we're just playing with it. a lot of design, and that's sort of the fun part, is you're just playing with it until it starts looking good. And you can move it around. I don't like how they're intersecting though, so what I'm going to want to do is probably make this a little bit straighter. We'll flip that horizontally. That's the angle we want. I'm very close to just making a new shape here. That looks fine. Why don't we do a larger one? Great. So when I was talking about like designers being visual communicators, like this is an action, right? We're taking an idea that we had, which was, maybe we could add some visual interest by making this grass. And we're just going to duplicate. Now we can duplicate this across the bottom. And again, your mileage may vary. This is pretty small, so it's going to take a second to fill the whole thing. But probably zoom out here. But I'm just watching this when we get, there we go. And that's probably a little small, but the idea is there, right? And so that's what we can start playing with. So why don't we go ahead here, and now we can scale this up. And already it looks much more interesting than when we started. Why don't we do 2 times? Yeah, nice. Nice. And you probably want to finesse that a little bit more. You probably want to say, okay, maybe we can stretch them. I don't know what that's going to do, but goodness. And it's fun sometimes just to play with this stuff and see what's going on here in Figma. And we can delete a bunch of these. Sometimes I'll come back and delete layers just because it does eventually start affecting your performance. Oh, we duplicated that whole section, and we don't want to do that. Nice. Okay, so this already looking a little bit more interesting, right? It catches your attention a little bit better, but it's probably too much contrast. So the next thing I'll do is, and this is something I learned from some really talented designers, is try to only make one change per board here. So you'll see as we get towards the end of this, I'll have like a bunch of boards. And the reason you want to do that is because it becomes much easier to kind of see your work evolve over time. If you try to do it all on one artboard, you don't see the diff, which is not easy and not good. So what if we just brought we got some layering going on. That's probably not going to work because we should have union that group, but it's kind of an interesting effect. We get a little bit more texture there, which I kind of like. So we'll play with that. What if we made this just a little bit lighter? HSB. And we're looking a little bit more like grass. I'm going to desaturate it a little bit. We've also got this color up here. Maybe I can keep it in the color palette. There we go. So that's a little lighter, but it still has that visual interest. So again, we're playing with colors. We're playing with contrast. Another thing I was thinking is if we have that up there, this is the only page where we kind of have this border here. So we go back to our view. Like, can we incorporate this on all the pages to just kind of have it be, part of the footer maybe at the bottom of the page, which that's kind of a fun idea. So why don't we go ahead, grab our group here, and we bring it to the footer, which is a component. I'm just going to detach this. So we've got a little bit of a design system here because I've been using this for other projects, which is all well and good. But I'm actually going to do that first. Lost my train of thought. But yeah, you can detach instances as you're going here. There's not like a hard, this needs to always have auto layout, or else sometimes I think it feels that way. Nice. Okay, that looks pretty cool too. So now all of a sudden this page is much, much more interesting. And I really like having this be a little higher here. Not too high because I think we're hitting the bottom, but it does look a little better here. So why don't we go up to here? Pump that up a little bit. Cool. All righty. Wow, look how much more interesting that is. So we started here, very flat, good by modern design standards. But, it was missing something. It was missing something that connected this and gave it some personality and gave it some visual interest. And so we added a little bit of grass here, and all of a sudden we've got something that's much more interesting. And so you ask yourself, like, all right, Nick, let's be honest. You looked at that design and you were able to suss out that was something that was missing, that was needed. How did you do that? Like, what was the process? And what's funny is if I try to articulate that to you and I say, well, I looked at it and I don't know, truthfully, if I'm being honest, I don't really know. I can't articulate why I looked at that design and I said, this needs more visual interest. What I can say is I've been designing for over 10 years, and I think I know something that is helpful for grabbing people's attention is visual interests. And it felt like this top of the page, while we had good text hierarchy, was just missing something that would help capture people's attention and keep them here. And so that is now we're starting to formulate a design rationale. And so this is something where designers, it's a hard thing to do because a lot of it is just like vibes, we're dealing with vibes here on the design side. But you can articulate these things when you start to think about them, and the more you can break that down, your thinking into those like sort of actionable. Okay, this is why we needed to do this. I think the better you become as a designer, and more importantly, the better you become at communicating design intent and what you're trying to accomplish here. So this is what's going on. We've added our visual interests here. Welcome to all the new folks. I feel like we've had some people coming and going throughout the 40 minutes here. Goodness, time is flying. We've got 20 more minutes though, and would love if there are any design questions or questions from anybody here. Happy to get into them. We can also, keep rolling on what we were doing here with our visual design. All righty. So one thing now, so again, I'm always going back and forth. I'm going back to the original. I'm like, my goal was to add visual interest. Have I accomplished that goal? Or do I feel like I've moved away from it? The next thing I'm noticing is this now feels a little tight because we've added this stuff down here at the bottom. So now I want to like rebalance the hierarchy and the visual presentation of all this information. So what I can do here, just come in here, make this a little bit larger. And again, I often look at numbers here and I try to follow like a spacing scale. It's usually based on the Tailwind UI one, which is like using units of 4. But, I'll also come in here and like start playing around and evening out things. And the visual spacing is a skill as well. Being able to just look at something like that's more balanced here. That goes to 64. That's like 10. That's also 54. So that really needs to go down like 10 to be mathematically balanced. So there's an element of that, but then there's the sussing out, okay, do we need to optically balance things? Frequently, we do. Okay, that looks a little more balanced and a little bit more breathable. There we go. Yeah, so so look at that. Look at the difference between these two. We made this one, and this is, again, why one change at a time is so powerful, because you can come back and you can say, okay, yeah, I was looking at this and it felt tight. I balance this now, and it feels a little better. And there's probably a world where you could refine this a little further, maybe get a little closer to it. Maybe that could be like 4 pixels closer or something like that. But this is where designing becomes, the art of design, and training your eye and building taste is a huge part of that. And so those muscles, they come with practice, and they come from looking at a lot of design and being able to leverage patterns either explicitly or subconsciously that you've like sort of internalized from all of the work that you're constantly looking at. So me, I'm always looking at art. I'm looking at art. I'm looking at other designs. I'm looking at designs in other contexts. I've got a great snapshot on my phone here. I was in the airport the other day, and I just saw a really, really nice. I'm going through all my kids' photos right now. A really, really nice design on a billboard above a restaurant, and I could show that to y'all. So that's over in the Houston airport, right? So I just saw that, and I was like, I really liked how they did the main motif there, the lemons and the oranges. I really liked the striping pattern behind it. I'm constantly looking for inspiration like that, and saying to myself, I want to save this for later so I can reference it when I'm doing, my design work. And you develop these repositories for yourself. So all that to say, that's how you get better at this like building taste and building this sort of unspoken and yet very, very real, very tangible ability to look at a design and say something is missing here. I need to start improving it. I need to start working with it. So what else can we do here? There's these cards now. So I think the header much like, so if I think about this from a user perspective, right? They're not going to see the whole page. They're going to kind of come up here, and that's like going to be the view in their viewport as they're rolling down here. What else can we do? Maybe we don't need that line anymore as much. And again, I'm just going to not remove the auto layout, but I'm going to detach the instance. Where did that go? It'd help if I'm selecting the right layer. And I'm going to get a whole bunch of people yelling at me for not using the keyboard shortcuts, but I think it's nice sometimes for y'all to see what I'm doing. Okay, so we've done that, and again, we can go look at them, attach them left and right. That's a little bit more prominent, but this kind of fades in a little bit easier. Here's another idea. What if we made this the same color? What's that? And again, I got ahead of myself sometimes, and that's okay too. So I'm not going to say you always have to duplicate your layers. Sometimes if you're doing a quick exploration, you're like, oh, I just want to see. Now this is something. Now we're cooking with gas here. If I do this though, I'm probably going to want to bump the contrast on this button a little bit more. What are you? You're 200? Yeah, so I would want that to be 200 as well. I forgot I had that there. And if I do that, well, that's probably okay. Where did my grass go? So we're at 200 right now. What if I made that 300? So that might be a little too much. We'll go back to 200. But again, we start playing with color now. So what are we doing? We're building contrast. We're building visual interest. We're doing all these things. What's also interesting now is because this is all connected, and so this is getting into Gestalt principles. When you use color before, these were very clearly defined sections, right? Because you had clear breaks between them. Now this all feels much more related. And I wonder if this shouldn't be a little higher now because of that, because we lost some of that spacing. So what if I go up a little bit more? I should have duplicated so I could go back and forth, but that's part of the process. I mean, just getting a feel. Wow, look at that. Now we're cooking with gas. So this is already, I think, looking so much more visually interesting. Again, go back to the beginning. Nothing wrong with this. Nothing wrong. And this is my own design work, right? Like this is work that I did. I'm just looking for ways to improve it. I think I forget. I think this is Walt Disney who was kind of into this idea of plussing, right? That's what they called it. That's like I think one of the Disney principles. You can always go back to old work or existing work and just improve it a little bit. Just make it a little bit better. And I think as product practitioners, there's such a draw to build the new thing, build the next thing. But sometimes, and frequently, something we should do more often, go back to what you have, go back to what's there, and just look for the little ways to make it better, to make it a better product experience. Alrighty, so now, and look at me, I'm just going back and forth all the time. And I'm not worrying about layer management right now. I'm not worrying about my components and making that all perfect. Very much when you're getting to handoff, when you're not exploring things, that can definitely come later. So now we're looking at these cards a little bit more. And these cards are like from a so normally with a card, what I'll start with is content, and I'll say, what is the information we have here? We got a lot. We've got a title, some sort of verification, description, tags, connection, recommendations, actually, a heart, a see more, and that's great. We were trying to keep, I think, in the original product requirements, trying to keep this very simple from a creation standpoint. So if we come over here, like you're logging in and you're just like adding a listing is very, very simple. We're not trying to make it hard for anybody to come in here and put in all this information. Like we didn't have to do an image upload or anything like that. And that can be okay. There can be, again, we're coming back here. We can say like, there are some technical feasibility things. We don't want to support images, or that's expensive. Come back to the business, expensive for us to store images. So, we don't want to rely on that as a solution. We do have user images, which is kind of funny, but maybe it's for avatars or something like that. Who knows? That's something we don't have to store. So the technical requirements informing the design, and something that as designers, sometimes I think we get into the zone here. We're like, oh, we need images here, of course. And then this is where developers get frustrated because they're like, now we got to deal with images, and it's a whole can of worms because it's not free. It's not out of the box. And you can run into issues there. So anyway, we're not going to use images. We're going to stick with just cards here, because I think the obvious thing to do would be like, oh, John's Lawn Services, what if we put their logo here? Or what if we put like an image of their business or work that they've done? What if we had a gallery of completed past projects and things like that? And you can certainly do that, right? That you can make the design and the product justification that would, improve the listing that they're doing here, and people will be interested in it. And that way they can show instead of telling. And that's okay. Now we got something for the backlog. It's something, and an experiment that we can A/B test and prioritize here. And this is how that product thinking can start working in conjunction with our design thinking. But we're going to have a requirement or a constraint on the design that we're not going to use images here. So how do we make these look a little bit better? What if, I think I duplicate that? Yeah, okay. So one thing we can do is we can move to less of a large card and maybe what if we did 2 columns, right? Can we do that? So I think we have the fixed width on this. And what I'm going to do is actually detach this instance here. I'm going to make it its own new instance. So that way I can play with it here and not feel like I'm breaking everything, which is, I've done that before. Definitely done that before. Why don't we put all these inside their own frame here? And what if we like wrapped it? Oopsie. Not like that. What we say? 1200 is the width. And we wrap it. And can we say now that all of these are going to be filling the container? Nope. Hugging the contents. That's a little better. What if we just say there, fill container? And what if we just say this is going to be vertical? And that didn't work the way I wanted to. Wrapping I've never mastered. Which is funny because we do it with coding all the time. I probably just need to maybe explicitly set these like 600. It'd be good if I got all of them. So you can learn the tools. Tools are moving faster than anything else. Okay, so now we've kind of got this sort of working here. We want to make sure we're reserving enough space, and that should be good enough. It would be cool if we could just say 100% and it would take the container. But all right, this is already, I think, looking a little bit better. Looks at least a little bit more dense. What if we went to 3 columns? So what was this, 1200s? That would be like 400 for all these. And, they say designers don't have to do math, but we got to do a little math. There we go. Okay, so now we're starting to get, the cards are breaking, which is okay. We sort of knew that was going to happen. So what if we made this fill the container? Obviously, we're going to have to bump this up a little bit more. The letter spacing here. See, these are the things. You break the design and you start sussing out all the differences here. Okay, we got a heart. That's too close to this thing. So now we have to start thinking about, okay, is this worth a squeeze at this point? I would say so. What if we hide that? Okay, that doesn't really flow the way I want it to. What if we bring the badge over here? That works a little bit better. What we could do is we can move this on top. And we're just playing, right? Nope, I didn't want to fix. I wanted to hug the contents. Okay. That looks a little bit interesting, but again, we're getting a little dense here. But I think overall directionally, this is right. Like moving this way. First off, we're increasing the information density, which is not always a good thing. It's generally a good thing. Sometimes designers like too much white space and just too few things on a page, and that can get a little tricky sometimes because you're, you want people to be able to find the information that they're looking for relatively quickly. Like their information sent should be pretty high, and they should be able to like scan the page and find the information. And so when you have it just a column like this, they got to do a lot of scrolling to get to what they want. Here, less, just by definition of the design, which can be a little helpful. Another thing we could do, I'm just looking at this now. So we have like different max widths here that we're playing with. This one, what are you, 40 from the side here? So what if, I think that's 1360 here, if I do that math right. There we go. Now we have a little bit more design consistency, which is great. There we go. 442. Obviously, we can tweak the space in there, but this is we've made some choices here. We've decided to have a very strong alignment on the side right here, right? And this is how you add like polish and quality. You make your design feel just like a little bit more considered as having really strong vertical lines throughout. Here we didn't. We had less of that, and even here we didn't. We sort of here we made the intentional choice to have sort of a shrunken content space, and that sort of worked, I think, with some of the other designs we had in the experience. But here we're being very intentional, saying no, we're going to keep those strong vertical lines, and it just makes it feel a little bit more polished, a little bit more put together here. So I'm doing this. What if we go ahead now, bring this back here? Cartoon. Oh, because we're using cards, or I should say components. That's fine. We just attach the instance. Say card 3. Relatively simple to do this. Great. And we'll just make a bunch. And so one thing that I'll often catch myself running into is not using a component because that's a little frustrating, that friction. But what ends up happening is then I have to always be reduplicating. And if I'm moving very fast, for me, that works a little bit better. But I know I understand why that can be frustrating for other people. So what if we brought that back in there and we fill the container now? Oops, did I fill the right container? Thought I did. Oh, that's probably going to be auto. There we go. Sometimes the auto layout a little tricky. And, I don't love that, but I get it. So what if we brought this back over here now? That's going to be auto, but this is going to be tighter. Nice. We're getting somewhere. And that's got to fill the container as well. Okay. This is fixed. That's why. Okay. And these are sort of like the technical production things that you'll learn. So this is working a little bit better for me. The issues are like in my head, you start with like a design and then you like stretch it and you say like, okay, what's going to break here? So we've got John's lawn services, but what if it was John and Sons? Ooh, Sons complete. Good to spell lawn services, right? So this is all of a sudden not going to work in the design anymore. And so we're going to have to stretch it here. So, okay, does that start working and what starts breaking here? And you're like, that actually needs a little bit more line spacing. And if we do that there, that's going to change it everywhere. These might need to have like different heights. We need to think about how the cards content would stretch a little bit more. So these are the kind of things where you start pushing the design and breaking it and coming back to it, and refining and working. So when you're asking yourself, why is your designer taking so long, or what are they doing? They're often doing this. They're trying to suss out, if I make these changes, if I stretch the design, how do we handle these design edge cases? A lot of designers, though, they'll do this work, right? I'm not saying folks aren't doing it, but what will happen is they do it and then they forget to tell the developer, or they don't like have an example of it for how we want to handle this case. So then it becomes, you put real data and real content into it, and it becomes time to do the build, and the developer's like, I don't know how we're going to do this or what it should look like. So not only should we do it ourselves to stress it and come up with solutions, we need to tell our developer counterparts, hey, this is how it should be implemented when we have these sort of situations. So, responsive, flexible designing, that's a big part of it. But directionally, look how much more interesting this page is now. We started all the way over here, right? And we kind of came in with the goal like, okay, this design is fine. MVP, get it out the door, let's do it. And from an implementation standpoint, super, super simple, which was sort of our goal, because I think we wanted to code it. But we did some explorations here. We said, can we make this more visually interesting? Can we make this, can we improve the information density? We're limiting ourselves because we don't want to use images for these cards here. And we were able to come up with something that I think at least is a little bit more visually interesting, probably more likely to grab somebody's attention and be more useful for them, more valuable, because the information density is there. So these are the kind of things, that designers are going through. And of course, there are big questions here. Like, what about pagination? What if we had a lot of these? Would it infinite scroll? Would it have some next button on the bottom here? This is that going back to that app, right? Engineering saying we can't have a query that returns every single listing. We've got 10,000 listings that would break this page here. And so they come back to design and say, hey, this overlap here wasn't considered. We need to design for it. Or we need to come up with a solution that's going to work. So that's where you get that back and forth, and having that open channel of communication is so important. So we've done a lot here, and we covered a lot of ground over the last hour. We didn't answer too many of y'all's design questions. That's okay. I hope y'all come next time. We're not going to meet next week because I'm going to be unavailable, but we will be able to the following week. So we've got 2 weeks here to cook up some design questions, bring some feedback. So obviously I'm working on my own designs here, but if you have work of your own that you'd love feedback on, super happy to look at that, give you all some pointers, some suggestions, and understand a little bit more about how we can take it to the next level. So hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you next time.